this is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
Body Bags with Joseph Scott Moore. One of the benchmarks, I guess, along my journey as a death investigator has been homicides involving the elderly. And here's why. A homicide victim that has reached maturity in their life, and I'm talking about chronological maturity, it has got a different kind of melancholy to it for me. And here's why. You've lived a long life. You've been embraced by people throughout your life that loved you and that you loved. You reach that age, and I would assume that many people, like I do, say, sweet Lord, please just let me pass peacefully in my sleep. But what makes it so tragic is that you lead a full life, and then all of a sudden, it comes to an end at the hands of a guy who is not only now accused of murder, but has previously been identified as a pedophile with a violent past. Joining you from the beautiful campus of Jacksonville State, Alabama, I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags. Dave, the case of Marcia Norman, 82 years old, by the way, crept across my news feed. And again, it's one of those moments in time where almost like you're driving down the road and something catches in the corner of your eye, and it truly makes you want to do a U-turn to go back and see if what you saw was accurate. And the reason it caught my eye was the fact that we not only have an elderly lady out in Washington State that has been murdered, but someone took the time to dispose of her in such a disrespectful manner where she has been essentially encased in concrete. And we've had other cases like this where, not like this, but we've had other cases of encasement. Okay. But this thing kind of happened really rapidly. And thankfully, I don't want to bury the lead, but I'm going to anyway. Thankfully, the police have identified somebody that they think is responsible for this, and this monster, and I will call this person a monster, is off the streets for the time being.
You're right, for the time being, but I was concerned as to how he ended up on the streets to start with, Joe. But here's what we've got. We have 82-year-old Marcia Norman, and she is missing. Her family has not talked to her in a couple of days. They're concerned. And as they were backtracking, when was the last time you talked to her? When was the last time you saw her? They came up with a date of April 1st. It's now heading into April 4th. And, at 82 years old, when you're in contact with family on a regular basis, at 82, that's too long to not get you on the phone. So they called for the old, let's do a welfare check. How many of our stories start with that? A welfare check. Here's this one. And when police go, they look inside the house, knock on the door and do all that. But they realize that, her vehicles are in the driveway. She has two, and they're both here. She is nowhere to be found. And it looks like, based on the way her home is, that she left in the middle of washing dishes kind of thing. There are plates and things that are in various stages of being cleaned. It's like you had dinner and you started cleaning up, but then, you got a phone call and took it, that kind of thing, and gone. That's how fast this happened in terms of the way police are looking at it. Now, when you've got dishes in the middle of being washed and an 82-year-old woman who is missing, you're going to backtrack to that date. When was this dinner that took place? Because we know, and that came back to April 1st, and they identified her handyman, a guy by the name of Jeff Zizz, Z-I-Z-Z, Zizz. He's a 47-year-old handyman, and he is the guy that was having dinner with her the night of April 1st when the dishes were partially cleaned. And that's where this case begins in terms of searching for her. They talk with Mr. Zizz a couple of times, and they already know him. He's in the system. He's in the system, though, as a child molester. He has been convicted, or pled guilty, rather, to sexually abusing 3 children under the age of 15. And that's why I said I'm concerned as to why he was out walking amongst the free. Anybody that preys on children like that ought to not be allowed out, but that's a different discussion for a different day, I'm guessing. At any rate, he's now the handyman.
No. We're going to have the discussion right now, and here's why we're going to have the discussion. Because I submit to you, Brother Dave, that anyone, you're talking about the Rubicon here. If you don't know the Rubicon, go back and read about Julius Caesar. And he was forbidden from crossing it. That's where we get that saying, you've crossed the Rubicon now. Let me submit something to you. And again, just Joe Scott's opinion here.
I'm with you, boss.
If you will rape, and we're going to use the word rape, you've taught me that, relative to children and adults. If you're going to rape 3 kids, I believe, in my heart of hearts, you're capable of anything. And I mean anything. And none of it's good. Now, there'll be people out there saying, oh, no, he's got some, he's got redeemable qualities. Okay. You going to let him keep your kids or be around your kids? Is that what we're talking about here? Because I got to tell you, anybody that would invest the time to put themselves in a position so that they could rape 3 kids, sexually molest them, take naughty pictures, do whatever in the hell it is that evil seed is compelling him to do within his mind. Look, killing grandmas, it's not a far stretch as far as I'm concerned.
That's a good point,
and
Joe.
When you mentioned that, he was known to have been in her presence, the evidence that I'm going to be looking for at that scene that would couple back, and it should be a very evidence-rich environment. And just let me throw out a few things to you. First off, the circumstantial evidence. If she was known to have prepared a meal, and I find it interesting, you're talking about washing dishes. Kim and I wash all of our dishes by hand now, because even though we have a dishwasher, it's not really a dishwasher. It's a dish heater upper and wetter is essentially what it does. It accomplishes nothing. So we wash all of our dishes by hand. Well, what are you going to be doing? Well, if you think she's a neat person, okay, that every time she dirties up a dish, she washes it. And so you'd have to go back out to the family and say, what kind of person was she? How'd she keep house and that sort of stuff? Well, if you've got 2 place settings, okay, that's kind of confirmatory. And how far had she gotten with the process? Well, that brings us physical evidence, doesn't it? If you think that you have like a dirty fork, dirty spoon, a knife, a cup, only partially consumed coffee maybe sitting in the bottom, guess what I'm doing? I'm collecting those things. I'm going to check them for DNA. You don't think about it. We always equate, DNA evidence and those sorts of things with sexual attacks. Okay. But, there's multiple different types of, when you think about intimate contact with items, placing a cup to your lips, putting a fork in your mouth, you're bathing those utensils in your saliva, which is a very good source, rich source for DNA. So all of that would have to be collected. What about the table? Did they sit at the table or did they eat at the breakfast bar? What evidence might exist there? Is there any evidence of cleanup in the bathroom? All of these things come into play when you've got this 82-year-old grandmother that has vanished into the air. Because one of the things I'm going to ask the family in regards to, did she keep a neat house? I'm going to say, she's 82. Was she suffering from any kind of dementia-related things? Did she just wander off? Was she predisposed to, just walk out of the house, that sort of thing? Before you would have to cross that barrier before you ever went to Mr. Zizz and try to ascertain whether or not he had anything to do with that. You just want to try to establish what her health circumstances are. You should in any case, but particularly with the elderly, Dave. And that brings us to another part here. She's 82. It's certainly not going to take too much to overwhelm her, take her by surprise, perhaps rob her of everything that she holds dear and value, including her life. Dave, you had mentioned Zizz in this child molestation thing that's going on with him. This is not something that's in his distant past. We're talking, am I correct? Are we talking about something that has actually occurred within this decade?
Yeah.
Right now?
Actually, Jeff Zizz previously pleaded guilty to molesting 3 children, all under the age of 15. And this happened in October of 2021. He pleaded guilty to 2 counts of second-degree child molestation and communication with a minor for immoral purposes. And that was when all this was filed, August of 2022. And he is prohibited under the terms of this agreement. And this is why I'm thinking, Joe, how is it possible the guy pleads guilty to molesting, sexually assaulting, damaging children for the rest of their life, 3 of them? How is this man still walking amongst the free?
I don't know. And here's the thing, Dave. Thank God he's not eligible to own a firearm until 2032. That's one of the stipulations in this agreement. And look, I'm being flippant there, and I mean no disrespect to the court, because there's so many of us that see these horrible things that happen in the news, and automatically our default position is put them under the jail, throw away the key. Okay. And yeah, I mean, I think that many of us would like to do that. I had a discussion with a friend of mine not too long ago. He had these same thoughts about people that are convicted child molesters. The topic of chemical castration came up, because, the old adage is that, they're incurable, that, that this is one of those manifestations that occurs where they can't retreat from it. They're still, compelled to participate in this behavior. But, the court had no way of predicting behavior. This isn't Minority Report. You can't look and see what the future. Now, there is some predictability, I think, if you go with this idea that they continue to molest, but he took a different turn, didn't he, Dave? Because if any of our colleagues over in profiling were looking at this, I would think that they would say, well, this is a bit of an outlier. Now, they would look at this as objectively as they could. They'd say, well, he's got a history of inappropriate behavior, sexual contact, enticing, all those sorts of things. But now what the police are saying is that he's, kind of bifurcated off of that, and he's heading down a road where he is alleged to have murdered an 82-year-old woman. And that just, those two things don't seem to to equate. But yet again, it goes back to my underlying supposition that, I think that once you're off into that world, you're numb to it. And I think that anything's possible. You can still, I think that all the barriers are down, the walls are broken, there's nothing shackling you. The individual could simply say to themselves, they've convicted me now, all bets are off. It's a hopeless case. I'm just going to run roughshod over anybody I come in contact with. And, and what's the difference? When you've got children that are weak, children that are certainly not sophisticated in the ways of the world, and you've got someone that's elderly who might have some infirmity, might be weak, might be lonely, and they just want company. She's allegedly prepared a meal for the guy that would end her life, Dave.
I know. Here's the thing, Joe, is we talk about Jeff Zizz, the handyman. I want to get back to what he was actually sentenced, okay? He was sentenced in this, when he pleads guilty to the sexual molestation of 3 children. He, of course, you mentioned the being prohibited from owning a firearm until 2032. Well, he was actually sentenced to 9 years in jail, but was released after 11 months. 9 years in jail, you're sentenced, but you get released after 11 months due to him receiving credit for time served. He also was ordered to serve 6 years of community custody or a supervised release and rehab. But 11, he's sentenced to 9 years. He doesn't even spend 1 full year in custody. They cut him loose. Now he's the handyman for 82-year-old Marcia Norman. She cooks him dinner, and then boom, she's missing. So when police interview him a couple of different times, they did start taking evidence. They are, I guess that's the only way to put it. They were taking evidence. He obviously is their person of interest. The guy is out on, he should be in prison right now, but he's not. He's the handyman for an 82-year-old woman. So we're going to take some clothes, some other items. And by the way, we're going to take his car as well. And as they are investigating, they've left him with no car. So what does he do? He borrows a friend's car and beats feet. He takes off, Joe. When they come back to talk to him again, he's gone. And that's where they have already put together enough information to find out that he has built they called it a ramshackle cabin, or a shed, rather, a ramshackle shed. Not on her property right there outside of Olympia, Washington. It's some ways away from her home, the home of Marcia Norman. And he has built this shed on this property, and investigators decide to go look. And lo and behold, Joe, they can tell there's been a lot of work going on around this shed. I was reminded of the story we did about the Kansas moms story that were buried. And you talked about the impact of moving dirt and what is left behind, and how, if you're trained to look for such things, you can tell when something's been dug up and buried. You can tell when something is there that wasn't there previously and shouldn't be there. And when police got to investigating this ramshackle shed, they found the same thing. Something ain't right here.
Yeah, you got a couple of things at work here when you begin to think about what's in the surrounding area. One terrifying little note here is the fact that if he built this, quote unquote, ramshackle shed, first off, how do they track him there? How do they find out that he has this shed? That's a big piece to this. Secondly,
I think I can tell you.
Okay, go ahead.
All right. We got the story that she went, last time she was seen was April 1st. She was reported missing April 4th. On April 4th, as they began investigating, who's the first person they talked to? Jeff Zizz, the handyman, because, hey, you were the last person to see her. He's admitted that. Last time anybody had contact with her was at 6:30 on April 1st, and she's been eating with a friend, supposedly. This handyman. Well, I'm guessing, I'm just spitballing here, Police, after their interview with him, decided, okay, guys, let's keep an eye on him. Let's see what Mr. Zizz does now. He is a convicted child molester. Let's see what he does. Well, they found out the day after their investigation began. On April 5th, he threw together the shed. So they obviously, no, not obviously. I'm going to guess, Joe.
Okay, go ahead.
All right. I'm going to guess that police used their brain and they were keeping an eyeball on him and saw him go into this area that they've referred to as unrelated property and found him building his makeshift shed. And that led them to go to, okay, let's put together a search warrant here. We need to look at what's in this shed. And then, wait a minute, let's get a search warrant for what's under, let's move the shed. And that's what they did. They got a warrant to move the shed, and it had just been built.
Yeah. And if you're going to go to this much trouble building a shed, first off, when I hear this idea, and these two things might seem unrelated, but I don't think that they are, relative to his past criminal behavior, recent past criminal behavior, by the way, and the disappearance of an 82-year-old grandmother. I'm really thinking with shed, what was the purpose of creating it? Was it the purpose of hiding something like a body, or was it purposed to hide activity? And, that's a really chilling piece to this. Because if you got somebody that is involved in serialized crime, and they have sadistic tendencies, most of that stuff that they engage in cannot be done where you can be seen to do it. So was this going to be a multi-purpose type of structure, ramshackled as it might be? How isolated was it? Is it going to have eyes on it? Can you hear sounds emanating from it? How much privacy does it provide? What's contained within the shed, hanging on the walls, perhaps? Were there things that were there that would give you an idea that he had other plans for things? And most importantly, how long had this shed been planned for? When you begin to tear down the structure and remove it, how well was it actually built? Anytime you hear that term ramshackled, I think is an indication that this is kind of a throw together, either that or it was greatly aged. And it seems like it. Didn't you say that the shed was thrown up pretty quickly, Dave? Yeah,
I was actually thinking ramshackle is usually something to describe something I built outside. Yeah, Dave built that again. Another ramshackle shed. Yeah, this was actually something that they started searching for her on April the 4th, and on April the 5th, the shed goes up in a day. And it took them a couple of days to get the search warrant, and it was April 9th when they actually were able to get the search warrant. So it shows you the amount of time. Shed gets built on the 5th.
Yeah.
And the 9th they're moving it.
And she's last seen on April the 1st.
Correct.
So if he has an awareness of this location, and she is transported to that location, and we know that this is not property that's associated with her, he has knowledge of this. I got to tell you, man, I'd be very interested to see what the rest of this property may hold, as far as anything else that has been out there. Okay. Anything else that might be an indication of his activities out there that predate that April the 1st time. Because, I think that when was his release date? Wasn't it like back in 2022?
October. August of 2022. He was agreed to the case in October of 2021. He pled guilty and was sentenced to 9 years in prison. In August of 2022, he was cut loose.
Yeah, well,
for time served.
I can't imagine that monsters retreat into their cave and just kind of sit back and twiddle their thumbs. He's now been unleashed on the public from that wherever it was he was being held at that particular time in state custody. If he is itching to do something else nefarious, how long did it take to kind of flip that switch in him? Was it something immediately, as soon as he walked out the door of whatever facility that they were watching over him at? How soon had he relocated to this area? I'd like to know what the people that are in charge of watching him, what did they know as far as his activities? Because you got to register. So you'd be on the state registry. Did he have a parole officer that was keeping tabs on him? What did they know? What was he saying he was doing for a living? Was it actually a handyman? Did he have pay stubs? How many clients did he have? Are there any other clients missing? Do any of those clients have children? Have any of those individuals filed any kind of report with the police about contact he may have had with them? Also, if he's working as a handyman and he's a convicted child molester, most of the time you can't be near a school. You can't be near kids. So, it kind of limits your clientele, because if you've got a family that has a nuclear family where you got a mom and dad and you got a couple of kids in the house, I don't think by law he could go there and, fix a leaky faucet because he's prohibited from doing that. And I think that his activities perhaps would be really easy to trace if, in fact, he was being watched. I guess probably the first time I ever came in contact with construction where it was required of me to mix up concrete. It was after my freshman year in college, and I'd gotten a job building fences. And it turned out that everybody I was building fences with that was on that crew, there were like 9 of them. We worked for a local hardware store that did this on the side. I was the only one that didn't have a felony conviction. And boy, was that an eventful summer for a young man. I got to tell you, I learned a lot. They were good guys. I mean, they really were. And they were, all about keeping their noses clean. Most of them, it had been a long time since any of them had been in the joint. But it's just a different vibe that you get. And they were hardworking. I mean, we'd start work at like 6 a.m. And of course, I'm low man on the totem pole. And so I've got to haul the bags of concrete, and I'm the one that's responsible for mixing it up and then delivering it to them as we're setting the post. Okay.
Wow.
And this is not
an
easy
task.
work. It's not, not easy. And I was, young and, had a strong back and, making, I don't know, whatever it was, $3.25 an hour. Yeah, no
buddy.
kidding. Not anymore. So, but yeah, and it's a, to mix it up, particularly in the sense that if you're going to encase something, this is not like you going out and getting a sack of Quikrete and digging a hole and, after you've set your post in there, then pouring the Quikrete around it, patting it down, letting it season and do all those sorts of things. This is something that is far, far more involved than simply trying to, fill a hole. You're talking about a large amount of this mixture having to be utilized, and in order to facilitate the covering or encasement of a body. And Dave, after they got that shed torn down, fill us in on what they found at that moment in time, because I kind of buried the lead here again.
They found Miss 82-year-old Marcia Norman buried under that shed, and they said partially encased in cement. And Joe, I was looking through this because I was thinking, was she cut up? And, he put body parts into cement, but that's not what it says. It says her body was encased in cement. We know that she was last seen April 1st. We're now talking, several days have gone by. What are we talking about in terms of her body and the smell, the decomposition, the condition of her body? What are we talking about in cement? Is it going to freeze time, or is it going to?
Yeah, it's not going to freeze time. Just always remember this with any burial, particularly an encasement, when you don't freeze time. However, anything that is at a trace evidence level that you bury with the body, that bit of it is kind of frozen in time. You're preserving. It's the ultimate in preservation. Now, concrete, cement, if you've got the body kind of raw in there and you're pouring concrete around it, it's not cocooned like in a bit of plastic or a shower curtain or something like that. That concrete is going to take things away when you chip it off. That's what's kind of fascinating about this from an evidentiary standpoint, because as that stuff is particulated, whether it be at the scene, first off, you're talking about several 100-pound block of concrete. All right, just let that set in. No pun intended there, but let that set in your mind relative to just the movement of the remains. Now, are you going to knock off those pieces at the scene and do it in an uncontrolled environment? Because outdoors in a wooded area is not controlled from an evidentiary standpoint. Okay, you're really walking a fine line there, because you don't have the environment necessarily to facilitate collection of everything that might come off and to be able to identify it appropriately. Do you forklift it out of there or put a skid steer and lift it onto the back of a truck, lash it down and take it back to the morgue? I've seen that done. And then you get hammers and chisels and you be able to knock off everything.
Joe, I am so sorry, but all right, you're talking about lifting a body encased in cement.
Yes.
Lifting it up all in one piece and loading it onto the back of a truck.
Yeah.
Covering it with a tarp.
Yeah. And
toting it.
Yeah. And we do that with cars all the time. People don't understand that. You'd be surprised what rides down the road next to you as you're going down the highway. I remember, believe it or not, you remember Yugos?
Yeah, the death trap things.
I had 5 guys that died in a Yugo fire one time on I-85 in Atlanta. And matter of fact, it was the hottest. The car caught fire, and it's the only time I was working that case, and it was in the dead of summer. And, Dave, I remember when I used to wear Magnum boots, cop boots, because they'll take anything. They were steel-toed, steel-heeled, and I could go out and, not have something pierce my foot or fall on it. But anyway, I just had a memory about this. The asphalt actually melted beneath my feet, and my feet were held in place on I-85 in Atlanta. And I was having to forcefully pull my feet out. And what we decided was the tires had melted off of this thing. And these guys had been working at the airport. They were from Honduras, and they were all living in the same apartment. And what they would do at the airport, which is on the south side of Atlanta, they would clean planes. It's hard work. They were a cleaning crew that would clean planes, and they would do it overnight. And then they would all go back to their apartment, which is kind of northeast of Atlanta. Sleep all day, get up and go back down there and do it again. Well, somebody rear-ended them in a classic Yugo kind of thing, and the gas tank is literally underneath the bench seat in the back seat, and the whole thing just goes up in flames. Well, we trucked that car, and this is just one example that I have. We trucked that one car with 5 bodies in it on a flatbed to a garage where we could, extricate the bodies and work them and that sort of thing. It would be the same principle here with Miss Norman, because if this is an encasement, and I find it very interesting that they have stated this is a partial encasement, which goes to probably hurried and not well prepared. You're still going to have to free her up from that. To what degree did they go with the particulating the stuff at the scene? Did they dig underneath it, put straps, beneath it, and then lock it onto like a skid steer, lift it up, put it on the back of a flatbed, and then cover it with a tarp and take it to a facility, either the crime lab garage, or maybe even into the morgue, if you've got the facility in order to handle this, and then chip away, this substance that she's been encased in. And I've even had bodies that were discarded in garbage cans, that they brought the whole garbage can in with the body. And that way you can really photograph the not just the body, but the container and the context of the body within the container. So my thought is they would want to get her body back to a controlled area where, and when you said, and the reason I mentioned about the partial encasement is that's kind of a descriptor, Dave, that you mentioned, because how powerful would it be? And trust me, they've got photos of this, and they can be shown in court. Maybe he didn't encase her whole body. Maybe her neck and her head were still visible, but the rest of her body is encased in maybe a single arm is hanging out. Maybe both of her feet are hanging out, because I don't know if he ratioed this right relative to how much concrete mix he would have. Did he have access to water? Did he have a mixer out there? Because this is labor intensive work. And then you had mentioned the thought of, well, was she dismembered before she went in there? I don't know. It's a real head scratcher, and it creates all kinds of problems for us in forensics. There is a real upside in the sense that what is encased in there, or, if you want to call it an entombment, I guess you could, but whatever is encased in there, you haven't really frozen it in time, but you've kind of held it. It's a placeholder for you where you can collect evidence. But as you chip the stuff away, there might be hairs that are caught up in this concrete that is drying all the while. And then as you pull it away, those hairs go with it. And how far are you going to go with pulverizing, those big chunks that you chip off the body to look for a single hair that might be contained in there? So it's kind of a nightmare scenario for you as an investigator. Also, any kind of injuries, which, by the way, my understanding is they haven't released a specific cause of death with Miss Norman. Is that correct, Dave?
They haven't, and that's what I have been watching, to see what we would get, because this is an ongoing case. It just happened in the last couple of weeks, and information is not going to be forthcoming until because they've got him in custody. And actually, the way police are going to go forward with this is when Jeff Zizz left the state, he violated his parole, and now it can be sentenced. He can be put back in prison for the full term. He's still got 8 years on that term. So they know where their suspect is. They've got him contained. So they can take their time on proceeding with this here on out. And so they don't have to give out information to us for anything. They don't have to rush anything. And,
no, they don't.
We haven't gotten anything.
They don't.
By the way, Jeff Zizz is a former pastor, Joe.
Lovely. Yeah. And you, no comment. I see what has taken place with him, and it's heartbreaking to think that, her grandbabies, even if they're grown adults, they're still her grandbabies. Her kids, her extended family, all of her friends that she's made. Remember, she's had 82 years to acquire relationships, hasn't she? And that's all gone. It's all gone. And the terrifying thing about this, and I agree with the sheriff, is that it was preventable. It was preventable had the lawmakers not created these circumstances where he could be out among those that are choosing to abide by laws and are choosing to not go into this really dark area in their life. And, just trying to, satiate those desires, because I know this. I know that you're never going to bring back Miss Norman. And just like those kids that he molested, you're never going to bring back their innocence on any level. But the one thing that's waiting in the wings are answers, hopefully. And hopefully one more thing. Hopefully this is going to be a wake-up call for the people in Washington State, and particularly the legislators out there, that sometimes it's so much better for individuals that are charged with heinous crimes to face the music. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed Human.